As the heart monitor's flatline echoed in my ears, my husband's comforting voice was notably absent from my final moments. Instead, the last sound I registered was a breaking news broadcast celebrating Dominic Wentworth's $20 million mansion purchase for his best friend Savannah. Passing away as a pathetic, unloved joke felt like the ultimate humiliation. Yet miraculously, my eyes fluttered open to reveal a world completely rewound to 3 years earlier. I died on a rainy Tuesday in a sterile, white room at Mount Sinai Hospital. I was 28 years old, weighing barely 90 pounds, my body ravaged by stage 4 stomach cancer. But the cancer wasn't what truly killed me. It was the suffocating, relentless loneliness. It was the 5 years I spent shrinking myself, folding my edges, and pouring every ounce of my soul into a marriage that was dead on arrival. Dominic Wentworth, the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Wentworth Industries, was my husband in name only. I had spent my entire adult life chasing his shadow, begging for a scrap of his affection. Meanwhile, his heart, or whatever icy mechanism beat in his chest, belonged entirely to Savannah Clark. Savannah was his childhood friend, his confidant, the fragile, soft-spoken white lotus who always seemed to need him at the exact moment I did. On the day I drew my last breath, my phone lay silent on the nightstand. Dominic didn't know I was dying. I had stopped calling him months ago, right after he missed our 5th wedding anniversary to fly to Paris because Savannah was having a panic attack. As my vision faded to black, the television mounted on the hospital wall blared a celebrity gossip segment. Billionaire Dominic Wentworth secures a historic Hamptons estate for his rumored flame, Savannah Clark. A bitter, blood-tasting laugh bubbled in my throat. I had given him my youth, my dignity, and my grandfather's massive inheritance, only to die completely alone. If I had one more chance, I thought as the darkness pulled me under, I would never look at him again. And then I gasped. Air rushed into my lungs, sharp, sweet, and freezing cold. The agonizing fire in my stomach was gone. The sterile smell of bleach was replaced by the heavy, intoxicating aroma of Tom Ford cologne, expensive champagne, and hundreds of fresh white lilies. I blinked against blinding flashes of light. The deafening hum of a crowded ballroom hit my ears. I was standing in the grand hall of the Pierre Hotel. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they were plump, healthy, and manicured, with a pristine French tip. I looked at my dress, a stunning, suffocating crimson Oscar de la Renta gown. My breath hitched. I knew this dress. I knew this night. It was the 14th of November, 2023, the night of the annual Starlight Charity Gala, the exact night my life had spiraled into an irredeemable joke in my previous life. In the original timeline, this was the night I found Dominic and Savannah tucked away in a dimly lit alcove of the ballroom. I had watched him wipe a smudge of lipstick from her chin with a tenderness he had never, not once, shown me. I had lost my mind. I had screamed, thrown my glass of champagne at Savannah, and caused a massive scene. Dominic had looked at me with unprecedented disgust, called security, and had his own wife dragged out of the venue in front of New York's most vicious socialites. That night cemented my reputation as the hysterical, unhinged wife, and Savannah's as the innocent victim. Anna? A soft, tentative voice pulled me from my shock. I turned my head. There they were, less than 10 feet away. Dominic stood tall and imposing in his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his dark eyes devoid of warmth. And clinging to his arm, wearing a pale blue silk slip dress that made her look like a fragile porcelain doll, was Savannah. "Anna, you look so flushed," Savannah said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Dominic and I were just discussing the charity auction. You don't mind that I stole your husband for a few minutes, do you? I just get so overwhelmed in crowds. In my past life, those words were the spark that ignited my explosive breakdown. I could feel the familiar, sickening spike of adrenaline. But then, the memory of dying alone in that hospital bed washed over me, cold and sobering. The love I once felt for Dominic felt like a distant, embarrassing fever dream. Looking at him now, I didn't see a god to be worshipped. I just saw a man who wasn't worth my time. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air fill my healthy, cancer-free lungs. I smiled. It wasn't my usual tight, anxious smile. It was radiant. It was indifferent. "Not at all, Savannah," I said, my voice smooth and steady. I stepped closer, my heels clicking deliberately against the marble floor. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly. He tensed, clearly bracing for my usual jealous hysterics. Instead, I reached into my clutch, pulled out a monogrammed silk handkerchief, and pressed it gently into Dominic's chest. "Just make sure you wipe her lip gloss off your collar, darling," I said lightly, keeping my eyes locked on his. "The press is right outside, and we wouldn't want Wentworth Industries stock to dip because of a cheap scandal. Keep him as long as you need, Savannah. I'm going home." Dominic's expression froze. For the first time in 5 years, the unflappable CEO looked genuinely thrown off balance. Savannah's mouth opened, but no words came out. She instinctively dropped her hand from his arm. "Anna, what are you doing?" Dominic demanded, his voice low and dangerous as I turned my back to him. "I'm tired, Dominic," I called over my shoulder without breaking my stride. "Have a lovely evening." I walked out of the Pierre Hotel with my head held high. The crisp November wind whipped through my hair, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, intoxicatingly free. The game was over. I was finally quitting. The penthouse in Tribeca was dead quiet when I arrived. Arthur, my longtime chauffeur, had looked at me with deep concern in the rearview mirror the entire ride home, clearly expecting me to dissolve into tears at any moment. But I didn't cry. I was too busy planning. The first thing I did upon entering the massive, sterile apartment was walk straight into the master bedroom. It was a monument to Dominic's cold, minimalist taste, shades of charcoal, slate, and ice white. I had spent years trying to warm it up with fresh flowers, cashmere throws, and framed photos of us, all of which he routinely ignored. I grabbed 2 large suitcases from the walk-in closet and began packing. I didn't take everything, just my essentials, my favorite clothes, and my dignity. I dragged the bags down the hall to the guest suite that overlooked the Hudson River. It caught the morning sun, unlike Dominic's cave, and it locked from the inside. At 2 a.m., I heard the heavy oak front door open and click shut. Dominic's heavy measured footsteps echoed down the hallway. I was sitting in an armchair by the guest room window, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, a thick stack of financial documents resting on my lap. His footsteps paused outside the master bedroom. Then they moved toward the sliver of light spilling from beneath the guest room door. He opened it without knocking. "What is this?" Dominic asked. He had taken off his bow tie, his collar unbuttoned, and yes, the lipstick stain was gone. His dark eyes darted from my suitcases to my relaxed posture. "It's a guest room," I replied smoothly, taking a sip of my tea, "and I am moving into it." "Stop playing games, Anna," he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose in that familiar gesture of extreme exhaustion. "If this is about Savannah, you know she gets anxious at these events. I was merely helping her navigate the press. Your little stunt in the hallway was entirely unnecessary." "I thought my stunt was quite polite," I said, setting my teacup down. "And I'm not playing games, Dominic. I'm simply giving you the space you clearly prefer. We both know you loathe sharing a bed with me. I'm just saving you the trouble of pretending otherwise." He stared at me, his jaw clenching. He was waiting for the punchline, for the tears, for the inevitable plea for his attention. When none came, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. "Do whatever you want," he finally snapped, turning on his heel. "I don't have time for your theatrics." Theatrics. In my past life, that word would have shattered me. Today, it barely registered. The next morning, I woke up early, refreshed and determined. While Dominic was still asleep, I dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit and headed straight to the offices of Tate and Partners in Midtown. Oliver Tate was a shark in a 3-piece suit. He had been my late grandfather's most trusted attorney, and he had practically begged me 3 years ago not to sign my proxy voting rights over to Dominic. My grandfather, Arthur Hayes, had been a titan in the logistics industry, and upon his death, he left me 15% of Wentworth Industries, a staggering block of shares that gave Dominic unquestionable control over his board of directors. Like an idiot, desperate to prove my loyalty to my new husband, I had handed Dominic absolute control of my shares. It was the leverage he used to build his empire, and the safety net he used to fund his lavish gifts for Savannah. Not anymore. Anna, Oliver said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as I entered. He looked surprised to see me without Dominic looming over my shoulder. To what do I owe the pleasure? Oliver, I said, taking a seat and crossing my legs. I need to revoke Dominic's proxy control over my shares. Immediately. I want full voting rights reinstated to me, and I want an independent audit of the dividends paid out over the last 2 years. Oliver's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well, well. I was wondering when Arthur's granddaughter was going to wake up. Consider it done. I'll have the revocation drafted and served to Wentworth Industries' legal department by 3 p.m. today. Thank you, I said. And Oliver, keep it quiet until the paperwork hits their desks. I want to enjoy the fallout. The fallout arrived precisely at 7:30 p.m. that evening, during the mandatory monthly family dinner at my mother-in-law's Upper East Side townhouse. Beatrice Wentworth was a terrifying woman who wore her pearls like brass knuckles. She had never liked me, openly preferring Savannah, whom she viewed as manageable and proper. Predictably, when I arrived at the townhouse, Savannah was already there, sipping sherry and laughing softly with Beatrice in the drawing room. Dominic arrived 10 minutes later. The moment he walked into the room, the temperature dropped. His eyes locked onto me, practically vibrating with fury. Anna, he said, his voice a low, lethal hum. My legal team received an interesting document from Oliver Tate this afternoon. Did they? I asked innocently, accepting a glass of sparkling water from the butler. Dominic, darling, what's wrong? Savannah asked, fluttering her eyelashes and placing a delicate hand on his arm. Is it business trouble? Anna has decided to revoke my proxy on her shares, Dominic said, his gaze never leaving my face. Beatrice gasped, nearly dropping her crystal glass. Anna, have you lost your mind? The board vote on the Asian expansion is next week. You can't possibly understand the intricacies of that deal. You will ruin everything Dominic has worked for. I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice echoing calmly off the high ceilings. I understand that my shares are my property. I also understand that for the past 2 years, millions in dividends from my shares have been quietly funneled into a subsidiary account. I paused, letting my eyes drift lazily over to Savannah, an account that recently purchased a rather expensive penthouse in Soho under an LLC. Isn't that right, Savannah? The room went dead silent, Savannah's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, shrinking behind Dominic. Don't you? I asked, taking a sip of my water. That's strange. The LLC is registered to your maiden name. Dominic, if you're going to use my grandfather's money to play sugar daddy to another woman, you really should hide the paper trail better. Oliver Tate is remarkably thorough. Anna, enough! Dominic roared, stepping toward me. The old Anna would have flinched. The reborn Anna just smiled. Oh, we're just getting started, Dominic, I said softly. I've quit playing the devoted wife. From now on, I'm playing for myself. Tuesday morning smelled like wet asphalt and impending rain. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised, heavy gray as my chauffeur, Arthur, pulled the Maybach up to the glass-fronted skyscraper of Wentworth Industries. I stepped out onto the damp pavement, adjusting the collar of my charcoal wool coat. The heavy, crisp fabric felt like armor. I didn't feel the gnawing, hollow anxiety that used to plague my every waking moment in my past life. Instead, my stomach was settled, grounded by the solid weight of the leather briefcase in my hand. Inside it was a stack of manila folders, fresh from Oliver Tate's office, filled with bank statements, wire transfers, and a string of emails that would tear Dominic's carefully constructed world apart. The security guard in the lobby blinked in surprise as I bypassed the visitor's desk and swiped my grandfather's old, heavy brass keycard. It still worked. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent, the hum of the machinery vibrating softly through the soles of my shoes. The executive boardroom was a sprawling, intimidating space dominated by a 30-foot mahogany table. When I pushed the heavy double doors open, the low murmur of male voices instantly died. 15 board members sat in high-backed leather chairs. At the head of the table sat Dominic, a stark white dress shirt crisp against his dark suit, his pen hovering over a thick legal document. To his immediate right sat Savannah's older brother, Wyatt Clark, the VP of Domestic Operations. Dominic's head snapped up. The annoyance on his face was immediate and visceral. "Anna," he said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying that patronizing tone he reserved for dealing with an unruly child. "This is a closed board meeting. The Asian expansion vote is taking place. You need to leave." I didn't blink. I walked slowly across the thick, sound-absorbing carpet, the sharp click of my heels breaking the heavy silence. I pulled out the empty leather chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. The leather was cold against my back. "I am aware of the vote, Dominic," I said, opening my briefcase. The metallic snap of the latches echoed in the room. "And as the legal holder of 15% of this company's voting shares, I am here to cast mine." "Oliver Tate served your legal department the proxy revocation 3 days ago. I suggest you check your email." A low mutter rippled through the older men at the table. Dominic's jaw tightened. He shot a look at his lead counsel, a nervous, balding man who hastily checked his tablet and gave Dominic a barely perceptible, terrified nod. "Fine," Dominic clipped, his eyes darkening. "You want to play executive, Anna? Stay, but we are voting on the expansion. And with my shares, combined with Wyatt's and the majority, we have the votes to proceed." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," I replied, pulling the first manila folder from my bag and sliding it flat onto the polished mahogany. "Before we discuss expanding across the globe, I'd like to discuss what's happening in our warehouses right here in New York." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The faint smell of his peppermint chewing gum drifted down the table. "Over the past 2 years," I continued, my voice steady, projecting clearly across the room, Wentworth Industries has faced 17 major lawsuits from warehouse workers citing severe safety violations, chemical exposure, and unpaid hazard wages. These are people who broke their backs loading your freight, Dominic. Yet every single one of those lawsuits was quietly dismissed in state court before ever reaching discovery. "This is irrelevant to the Asian expansion," Dominic interrupted, his palms slamming flat against the table. "These are resolved legal matters." "They weren't resolved," I said, pulling out a stack of paper. "They were buried. I had Oliver Tate hire an independent forensic accountant. Those millions of dollars in dividends that you siphoned from my shares didn't just buy Savannah her Soho penthouse. The rest of the money was funneled through Savannah's LLC into an offshore account owned by Judge Harrison Croft." The name dropped like a physical weight in the room. Several board members gasped. Judge Croft was a highly public, supposedly tough-on-crime municipal judge known for his political ambitions. "That is a baseless, slanderous accusation," Wyatt shouted, standing up so fast his chair hit the glass wall behind him. His face was flushed red, a stark contrast to Dominic, who had gone completely pale. "I have the wire transfer receipts," I said, holding up a printed document with a red bank stamp, matching the exact dates Judge Croft dismissed our workers' claims. "You systematically destroyed the lives of injured, working-class people just to keep your domestic profit margins high enough to secure the loans for this Asian expansion. You used my grandfather's money to bribe a judge, and Savannah and Wyatt facilitated the transfers." I looked around the table, making eye contact with the older board members, men who had built this company with my grandfather. This isn't just a PR nightmare. This is a federal crime. If you vote for this expansion today under Dominic's leadership, you are attaching your names to a sinking, corrupt ship. The SEC and the FBI have already received these files. They were delivered to Foley Square at 8 o'clock this morning. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The air felt thick, heavy with the sudden realization of impending ruin. Dominic stared at me. The arrogant, untouchable CEO was gone. In his place was a man looking at a stranger, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. He finally realized I wasn't throwing a tantrum. I was executing a slaughter. You, Dominic choked out, his voice hoarse. You realize you're destroying the value of your own shares? You're ruining the company. I am amputating the rot, I said calmly, closing my briefcase. My grandfather built this company on honest logistics, not on the broken backs of workers and the pockets of corrupt politicians. I'm stepping in to clean up your mess. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I vote no on the expansion. And I am officially filing a motion for the immediate removal of Dominic Wentworth as CEO, pending the federal investigation. The collapse of Dominic's empire didn't take months. It took exactly 4 days. The federal authorities moved with terrifying speed, spurred by the indisputable paper trail Oliver Tate had provided. The FBI raided the Wentworth Industries headquarters on a Friday afternoon. I wasn't there to see it, but I watched it on the local news from the quiet comfort of my new apartment on the Upper West Side. The camera feed showed federal agents carrying out stacks of cardboard boxes. Then, the footage cut to Judge Harrison Croft, his face shielded by a trench coat, being escorted into an unmarked black sedan. The most satisfying footage, however, came from Soho. Savannah had been photographed being led out of her $20 million penthouse in handcuffs. The delicate, fragile White Lotus looked frantic, her mascara smeared down her cheeks, screaming at the paparazzi that she didn't know anything, that Dominic had tricked her. When the pressure was applied, Savannah turned on Dominic instantly, handing over her brother Wyatt and offering to testify against Dominic in exchange for immunity. But her signature was on the LLC. The money laundering charges stuck. A week later, the crisp autumn air had turned to a bitter, biting winter chill. I was sitting in Oliver Tate's office. The smell of old paper and lemon furniture polish was deeply comforting. The heavy oak door opened, and Dominic walked in. I barely recognized him. He had lost weight. His custom suit hung loosely on his frame. The sharp, arrogant angles of his face were softened by exhaustion and the gray, puffy bags under his red-rimmed eyes. He smelled of stale coffee and stale sweat. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week because he hadn't. His assets were frozen. His mother Beatrice was facing tax evasion charges of her own after the forensic audit exposed her offshore accounts. He sat down in the chair across from me, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on his knees. "Anna," he whispered. His voice was broken, stripped of all its former power. I pushed a thick manila envelope across the desk toward him. The heavy texture of the premium bond paper slid smoothly over the polished wood. "Divorce papers?" I said, my tone flat, devoid of anger or pity. Given the federal charges for embezzlement and fraud regarding my personal assets, the prenuptial agreement is voided under the infidelity and criminal conduct clauses. You get nothing. Sign them. Dominic stared at the envelope as if it were a loaded gun. "Anna, please," he said, his voice cracking. He leaned forward, desperation leaking from every pore. "I can fix this. I know I neglected you. I know I was a fool with Savannah. She manipulated me. Stop," I cut him off. The sheer pathetic nature of his excuse made my skin crawl. "Don't blame her for your choices, Dominic. You chose to ignore me. You chose to steal from me. You chose to bribe a judge and ruin the lives of hundreds of warehouse workers because you thought you were invincible." "I am facing 10 years in federal prison, Anna," he pleaded, a single tear cutting through the exhaustion on his face. "Please, if you just tell the prosecutors that the shares were a joint marital asset, that you had knowledge of the transfers." He wanted me to perjure myself. He wanted me to go down with him. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. The burning, desperate love I had harbored in my previous life was so foreign to me now, it felt like it belonged to another species. "There is a pen right next to the envelope, Dominic," I said softly. "Sign it, Or Oliver takes this to trial and we ensure you get 20 years instead of 10. He looked into my eyes, searching for a trace of the weak, sickly woman who used to wait up for him every night. He found nothing but cold, hard reality. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he picked up the pen. The scratch of the nib against the thick paper was the loudest sound in the room. When he finished, he stood up, looking hollowed out. He didn't say another word as he turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy and defeated. Oliver picked up the papers, inspecting the signature. "He's finished, Anna. The board officially appointed you interim CEO this morning. What's your first order of business?" I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt. I walked over to the large window overlooking the bustling streets of Manhattan. The sun was breaking through the gray clouds, casting a sharp golden light over the city. First, we settle every single lawsuit with the warehouse workers. Full back pay, medical coverage, and a public apology, I said, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Then, we rebuild this company the way my grandfather intended. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. My stomach didn't hurt, my heart wasn't aching. I was 28 years old, I was healthy, and I was finally in control. I didn't just survive my past life. I rewrote it, and this time, the story was entirely mine. If Anna's journey from a neglected wife to a powerful, independent woman inspired you, don't forget to like this video, share it with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you thrilling, real-life drama stories every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and drop a comment below letting us know what you would have done in Anna's shoes. See you in the next story.